Section F, America's curse of empire. So we're making negotiations with Spain to officially end this war. So we're composing a treaty here. But the problem is we don't know what to do with the Philippines. We weren't expecting the Philippines when we started this war. Yes, we knew we were trying to free Cuba, and we had passed the Teller Act, which more or less said if we help free Cuba, we're going to give Cuba its independence. But we don't know what to do with the Philippines. So President McKinley has a number of choices. One, he can just let Spain have it. Spain had it before the war. They could give it back to Spain. But that doesn't seem like a very fair idea. After all, the Filipinos had fought right alongside the Americans, gaining their freedom from the Spaniards. So that didn't seem right. Another option would be to give the Filipinos their freedom. That's what they wanted. That's what we were doing in Cuba. The problem was they weren't really ready for their independence quite yet. And we knew, or we supposed, that if we left them alone, that'd probably lead to anarchy, and they'd be very vulnerable for another country like Japan or Germany to come in and take over. So we're like, that's probably not a good option either. Third option McKinley had was to simply annex the Philippines, have it become a part of the United States. All right, so he had a hard decision to make. So McKinley was really known as a president who was very much aware of public opinion. As the saying goes, he always had his ear to the ground, listening for what's kind of rumbling around. One thing he heard was from the missionaries. The missionaries really wanted to see the annexation of the Philippines in order for them to be able to go in and then convert the natives there. The natives had been under Spanish rule, ergo a lot of them were Catholic, and a lot of missionaries wanted to see them become good Protestant Christians. Also his wife thought it was only the right thing to do to annex the Philippines because she thought that's what's best for the people. She thought, think of all the good America could bring to this civilization, education, health, infrastructure. She thought that's what would be best for the people in the Philippines themselves. Also, big business was very eager to annex the Philippines because this would be a new market where they could sell their farm goods or they could sell their factory goods. It's a new market. So a lot of big business and farmers, for that matter, were really on board with kind of taking in the Philippines. On the flip side, however, we have people called the anti-imperialists, and they form a league that is actually called the Anti-Imperialist League. And there's some very prominent Americans in this league. We have Samuel Gompers, who's in charge of the AFL, that really big labor union. We have the president of Harvard, the president of Stanford, Mark Twain, Andrew Carnegie, a lot of big names thinking this is not the way to go at all. Even Thomas Reed, who's the Speaker of the House, will resign over this issue, thinking that if we annex, he didn't want any part at all of annexing the Philippines. And this is their perspective. They thought, one, we're not going to come out on top when it comes to economics here. We're going to have to pour in a whole bunch of money into the Philippines to get it running, to build it roads, get good health care, to have schools. That costs money, so it's not going to be a good economic decision. Also, think about this. If we own the Philippines, we're now in a new realm of politics. Now we're going to be smack dab in the middle of Eastern Asian politics. It's like a new can of worms of politics a lot of Americans just didn't even want to touch. And also probably the most prominent argument they made was this annexation of the Philippines was totally against, America's political philosophy. We had always been based on government should be based on the consent of the governed. And the Filipinos wanted their freedom. So if we were to take the Philippines away from the Filipinos, it would be just as bad as King George keeping the American colonies under his thumb. So there is definitely kind of this first big debate over is imperialism good, bad, that sort of thing. Well, when it was all said and done, the treaty was passed. So we gave $20 million to Spain In return, we received the Philippines, and it only passed the Senate by one vote, or they had one vote to spare. So it was a close call, but nonetheless, America had spoken. Section G, perplexities in Puerto Rico and Cuba. Well, something I should note is a part of the treaty we made with Spain, we actually received Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is this little island kind of by Cuba. So we received Puerto Rico, but the question was, what are we going to do with Puerto Rico? Like, is it going to become a state? Is it going to become a territory? Like, what do we do? We passed the Four-Raker Act, which more or less gave the people in Puerto Rico a limited popular government. So they had some control over, their own government. But it was really the Supreme Court who made the decision of how we were going to consider these newly acquired peoples. And these decisions, or these cases, were called the insular cases. The insular cases really said that, yes, the people in Puerto Rico, and the Philippines for that matter, yes, they are U.S. citizens. However, they do not enjoy all the constitutional rights that other American citizens in the United States have. So just like practically speaking, right? People in Puerto Rico, even today, they don't get a vote for who's the president of the United States. They don't have senators. They also don't have to pay as many taxes as we do. So it's just really kind of establishing, yes, you're citizens, no, you're not subjects, but you're kind of somewhere in between. Kind of, sort of. All right, so let's talk about Cuba, because, why not just throw Cuba in this section? What happens in Cuba is this, okay? We have kind of a military government being set up a little bit, and we really go a long way in improving Cuba. Better finance, better education, better agriculture, better health in general. They really go attack yellow fever. They kill they really clean up the breeding areas for mosquitoes, that sort of thing. So we decide we will withdraw our troops completely, but not until Cuba passes something called the Platt Amendment. Platt is spelled P-L-A-T-T. The Platt Amendment is an amendment to the Constitution of Cuba that more or less says the following. The United States has the right to intervene in Cuba if things go, badly. Also, Cuba had to consult the United States when they made treaties, that sort of thing. So we said, no, we won't withdraw our troops until you ratify this amendment or approve this amendment. So finally, Cuba does begrudgingly approve this Platt Amendment, giving the U.S. kind of a right to interfere if things go wrong. And we finally pull our troops out. Cuba. All right. I should mention, as a part of that Platt Amendment, it also gave the U.S. right to a couple of different harbors or bays, specifically, or most notably, Guantanamo Bay. We still kind of own that part of Cuba to this very day, or I shouldn't say own it, but we make use of it today. All right, Section H, New Horizons in Two Hemispheres. Okay, so this is kind of the effects of the Spanish-American War on the United States, global image. Because frankly, what this does, it does wonders. The Secretary of State calls this war a splendid little war. It only lasted 113 days. There wasn't a whole lot of people who died. So it really helped to bolster America's prestige internationally. For example, a lot of foreign countries really bumped up, you could say, their embassies in Washington, D.C. Before this time, our capital was really kind of seen as a backwater capital to the rest of the world. But now, after the Spanish-American War, we're rising in the ranks a little bit. And a lot of countries actually kind of, fancied up, if you will, their embassies in D.C. Another effect of this war is that we really got a new kind of military spirit in America. We see Captain Mahan creating better battleships. We see the Secretary of War founding the War College in D.C. But the most important result for America is the fact that the division between the North and the South caused by the Civil War is slowly lessening because of this war. You know, nothing brings two people together like a common enemy. So now the North and the South are both fighting against Spain. It really did wonders to kind of bring together, rectify that division that had been in place for so long. Okay, section I. Little brown brothers in the Philippines. Well, you thought we were over the Philippines. We decided we're going to annex them. I thought, you know, aren't we done talking about the Philippines already? Not quite yet. Because here's the problem. The people in the Philippines, they never got a say. And they're like, no, we just fought to get Spain off our backs, and now we have America controlling us. We're not happy. So once again, we see the guy by the name of Emilio Aguinaldo, the same guy who led the rebels against the Spaniards, is now leading a rebellion against the Americans. Excuse me. So American troops have to go back into the Philippines to kind of crush this rebellion. And it's really hard to do because, once again, these rebels kind of have guerrilla warfare tactics, kind of just hide out in the forests, that sort of thing. So American troops are now fighting the same people they had been fighting alongside just months previously. All right, so let's talk about what happens. America kind of loses any nobility they had in the Philippines. They start kind of fighting dirty. They use kind of a water torture method. They called it the water cure, which is more or less forcing water down their throats until they yielded information or they died. We set up concentration camps, or reconcentration camps, I should say, of our own. Remember in Cuba, General Weyler from Spain had set up all of these horrible concentration camps in Cuba? Well, now that's happening in the Philippines. Okay, United States soldiers are doing this, and the idea is if you kind of bring together all of these civilians in one place, these civilians are now unable to help the rebellion in any way. So we're kind of fighting dirty, to say the least. So we finally do squash the rebellion, and when it all is said and done, about 4,000 Americans are killed, while 600,000 Filipinos die. So we can see a lot of Filipinos die in this rebellion. The United States sends a man by the name of William Taft, who will become president later on, into the Philippines to kind of head up this new government there. And he calls them his little brown brothers. That's where the section gets its title from. And we, just like we did in Cuba, we send in a lot of money. We pour money in, build better roads, have a better health and sanitation system, surprisingly successful school system. So English actually becomes the second language in the Philippines. We start trading, especially in sugar. But just keep in mind, the Filipinos aren't happy, and it won't be till after World War II that they do get their independence. All right, last section, I think, for this video. Hinging the open door in China. So we're jumping around. We're officially done talking about the Spanish-American War, but since this chapter is about imperialism, we're going to be talking about how the United States interacted with different parts of the world. China, let's talk. Well, China had been weakened by a lot of fighting that had been taking place between China and Japan. So because China was really weakened, we see a lot of European countries start kind of going into China and setting up what we'll call spheres of influence. So nothing official, but kind of they have a presence in different sections of China. Well, people in America are sitting back, not liking to see China being carved into these different spheres of influence, mostly because we didn't have one. So for some reasons they don't like it. One, missionaries are afraid that their influence that has started to take root in China will be diminished. And also, businessmen are concerned that, all these European countries are going to kind of monopolize the Chinese market, and the United States won't be able to sell goods to the Chinese. So they convinced the Secretary of War, his name is John Hayes, to do something about this. What he does is he sends a series of notes to these European countries who are kind of setting up these spheres of influences. And these are called open door notes, and that leads us to something called the open door policy. And the idea here is to try to get these European countries to say that while, yes, you can have your own special little sphere of influence, we want to keep the market, the Chinese market, open for the rest of the world. Also known as, we want to make sure we can still trade with China. So having an open door, saying that, yes, you have some control, but you should let us also trade. We shouldn't really, divvy up China. We should leave that door open for the world to trade. Okay, most countries agree to some extent. Russia doesn't, but who cares? Like, Russia, I'm sorry. But anyway, what ends up happening, though, is the Chinese really feel like they're being treated like a doormat. They have no say in the matter. So a group of Chinese nationalists, you could say, get together and form a rebellion. And this is called the Boxer Rebellion. Boxer, mostly because they had a lot of martial arts skills, so they called them the Boxers. That was not their official title, but that's the one history knows them by. So what happens is these Boxers kill about 200 foreigners, but then kill thousands of Christians because they felt the Christians had kind of sold out, you could say, had become Christians, had kind of adopted Western ways. So they killed a lot of Christians. So now countries from all over the world, Russia, Russia, Germany, France, that sort of thing, England, America, send in troops. So there's about 18,000 troops from all over the place that go in to crush this rebellion. And it's crushed. So after that, they really make sure that John Hayes, the Secretary of State, really then goes in and makes sure even after this rebellion happens that we really do keep this door open in China. And this door won't be closed until Japan starts breaking the rules in World War II. All right. Let me see. Yep. We'll do one more section in this video. Section K, Imperialism or Bryanism in 1900. Okay. So we're talking about the election of 1900. Okay. So we're looking at the Republicans and the Democrats. Well, for the Republicans, it's a no-brainer. They are so going to elect McKinley or nominate McKinley again. He had acquired the Philippines. He had stayed true to the gold standard. He's golden. Okay. But then the question becomes, who's going to be the vice presidential candidate in this election of 1900? We have McKinley, but who's going to be his VP? And what ends up happening is Theodore Roosevelt actually becomes the vice presidential nominee. And here's why. Well, one, of course, he's famous for being that Rough Rider, no-nonsense cowboy in Cuba. But two, he's currently the governor of New York. And something you should know about Theodore Roosevelt, also known as TR, he doesn't take nothing from nobody. He's going to make his own decisions, and he's going to stick with those decisions. So the political bosses in New York hate him. They can't stand him as being governor because they can't manipulate him. So the bosses in New York try their darndest to get him on the vice presidential ticket because they want to see him get out of New York so they can elect somebody who's a little more malleable, shall we say. So, with the help of the New York bosses who want to kick Theodore Roosevelt out the door, Theodore Roosevelt becomes the vice presidential nominee on the Republican ticket. Kind of important because, spoiler alert, within 6 months, McKinley is going to be assassinated. All right, don't tell anybody. It's a secret. We're not there yet. All right, that's Republicans. On the flip side, we have the Democrats. They once again nominate William Jennings Bryan. And this guy is, of course, the guy who gave the Cross of Gold speech, definitely in line with Democratic principles. Also, they're kind of running during this election on the idea of anti-imperialism. They said Republicans more imperialistic, Democrats are anti-imperialistic. But really, it's no contest. McKinley easily wins. The Electoral College, it was 292 to 155. And the New York bosses were more than happy to get rid of Theodore Roosevelt. think that is enough for this video.